Acquisition of illusionist spells. Illusionists do not need the spell, read magic, or anything like it in pursuit of their profession. All illusionist spellbooks and scrolls are written in a secret tongue, which every apprentice learns from his or her mentor. This arcane and difficult language is common to all phantasmal magics and is necessary for illusionistic conjuring. When an illusionist gains read magic at the 14th level, along with several other first level magic user spells, this merely allows him or her to utilize magic user scrolls that contain spells different from those on the illusionist lists. When a first level illusionist receives his first level spellbook from his master, it contains only 3 spells, read magic being unnecessary. The DM should require the player's character to roll a d12 on the table of first level illusionist spells, rolling 3 times and ignoring any rolls that result in duplication. If a DM feels his or her campaign is unusually difficult, he or she may allow the player to choose 1 or even 2 of these initial spells. And that is Acquisition of Illusionist Spells from the first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. I am teacher, historian, podcaster, father, gadfly, man about town, Ben Riggs. And with me, as always, is the Wizard of Wauwatosa, a weapon of mass instruction, Dr. Scott Bruner.
Good morning, everyone.
So I want to say this. I think that the section here on character spell acquisition may be the longest stretch of good, logical, thorough text that we've encountered in the DMG in years. Like, we're reading it, it makes sense, it's following along coherently. Like, the followers, like the fact that followers came before this still surprises me. And that kind of hung together. But this it hangs together, it makes sense, and it makes you want to make a character, which is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this a few times, but every time, whenever the problem, we record this on Sunday mornings fairly early, and every time I read this, the nice thing is that I run my games on Sunday, but it's amazing how much this always makes me want to play first edition D&D. There's something to, there's something to just the way that the text feels constantly around. It's not quite passion, but there's such a comprehensive quality of verisimilitude, I suppose, to the world when you kind of read this text, where you're like, it's amazing how it really draws you in and makes you want to be part of this world.
Yeah, and to be honest, having the experience of very slowly reading pages 38 and 39, I did kind of want to go back and reread how clerics got their spells as opposed to how magic users got their spells. Do you recall that off your head or no?
I don't. The difference between how clerics get spells or the actual text?
Well, clerics pray, right?
Yep.
And they have to pray every day, and they get their spells from their deity, and they better suck up to their deity or else. And then magic users, it's memorization, right?
Yep, that's correct.
And with magic users, you have to find spells, put them in your spell book, and then from your spell book, you choose what you're going to memorize every day, right?
That's correct.
And let's see.
What I think is fascinating, and something that I think about a lot of times, and I know we're going to have, we're coming up is a little bit of a teaser as far as having some of the designers of 4th edition coming on. But what I think is really interesting is we're reading, the original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide, and we've gone through, we're now in the I was about to say we're about to embark on the 5.75th edition, but if we actually count the editions, if we count 3.5 as a new edition, or how 7 editions coming up on it, it's amazing how these rules, these basic structures that Gygax and Arneson came up with, still stuck around. And the reason I was thinking about 4th edition is because that was the one edition where people actually, literally, like the hairs on their arms rose because they couldn't handle some of the major changes to a lot of the major assumptions and concepts of Dungeons and Dragons. And my point is, it's interesting how we still, cleric spells, and I suppose the biggest change to the spellcasting mechanic would be the spell slot system in 5th edition. And I always joke, I run Curse of Strahd, and I've been running 5th edition rather regularly since it came out. and I still don't actually understand the spell slot system. I still actually let the players figure that out and tell me how it works. But
Isn't it the same as this? Isn't it you have a spell book, you have this many spell slots per day, you memorize them, and then it's fire and forget, thanks to Jack Vance?
no, you're asking me to explain spell slots in fifth edition, which I don't know. No, it is different because
Really?
you have a number of slots. In first edition, you're like, okay, I'm gonna take magic missile 4 times, and that's it. With fifth edition, you have these slots, first level slots, and this is why I struggle with fifth edition because you're still doing that. You're still doing these are the 5 spells of the 10 that I have that I can choose every day, but I have to then choose. But then I have 4 spell slots, so you don't memorize magic missile 4 times. You just say I've memorized magic missile and I've got 4 spell slots to use of the 4 spells that I've memorized. So it is a little, and then of course it has the other mechanic where you can say, I'm going to cast, and I don't know if you could do this with Magic Missile, but I'm going to cast a first level spell with a second level spell slot because that makes it a little more powerful.
Oh man.
That stuff you can't do in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
May
You
may
have to
I
say,
may I
yep,
read aloud from Roll 20 the 4 paragraphs on spell slots?
sure.
Because again, this is a very interesting point. Regardless of how many spells a caster knows or prepares, he or she can cast only a limited number of spells before resting. Manipulating the fabric of magic and channeling its energy into even a simple spell is physically and mentally taxing, and higher level spells are even more so. Thus, each spellcasting class's description, except that of the Warlock, includes a table showing how many spell slots of each spell level a character can use at each character level. For example, the third level wizard Umara has 4 first level spell slots and 2 second level slots. When a character casts a spell, he or she expends a spell slot of that spell's level or higher, effectively filling a slot with the spell. You can think of a spell slot as a groove of a certain size, small for first level slot, larger for a spell of higher level. A first level spell fits into a slot of any size, but a ninth level spell fits only in a ninth level slot. So when Umara casts Magic Missile, a first level spell, she spends one of her 4 first level slots and has 3 remaining. Finishing a long rest restores any expended spell slots. Some characters and monsters have special abilities that let them cast spells without using spell slots. For example, a monk who follows the Way of the Four Elements, a warlock who chooses certain eldritch invocations, and a pit fiend from the Nine Hells can all cast spells in such a way. Then you're right. There's 2 paragraphs on casting spell at a higher level, and you're right. Like I don't know that I've ever played a magic user in Dungeons and Dragons. I've always been a fighter thief guy. Specifically, again, uh, 2 sword fighting elf. Again, Blade Singer is my only dip into magic users of ever. But I can see how you're right that especially to new players that would be confusing. You mean I get 10 spells, but they're not any spells. They have to be of a certain level. And if I'm at least in 3.5 when I played it with people who'd only played fifth, they were like, wait, I'm third level, but it doesn't necessarily mean I can cast third level spells.
Yeah,
There's third. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
no, it's one of the few things that I would say is not particularly intuitive about fifth edition. We've talked about a lot of fifth editions kind of in actions. I don't say it's simplified, but it's extremely elegant in its mechanics systems. But the fact that I still have a hard time I still have a hard time intuitively understanding spell slots. I have read the spell slot system on Magic in the fifth edition player's handbook countless times, and I get it for about 8 minutes. And then I'm like, wait, how did that work again? And it's funny because more of my games happen online these days than anywhere else. And I recently did play in one of my best friend's campaigns, and I played a spell. It's actually funny. There's a mod for fifth edition called Darker Dungeons, and it's a really interesting mod. And one of the core conceits of the Darker Dungeons mod is that you make almost no decisions on your character.
Hmm.
Everything is rolled, everything is completely random, and it's funny because I almost always have spellcaster. Bard is my go-to class, despite the fact. Can I just make a point?
Make a point.
And the Bard is getting ruined these days. Not mechanically. Everybody's playing Bards. When I was 14 years old, well, that's not true because the AD&D Bard, which is in the very end of the Dungeon Masters, but right at the very end of this book, and it's a completely messed up rule set. But the second edition Bard was pretty cool, and that's where it really kind of came into its own. And back then, the Bard was something that only is the strange of us, only, everyone wanted to play a paladin when I was a kid. And now Bard, I would say, is probably one of those popular classes. Like if you, I would I'm going to make an assumption here that may not be true. If you were to jump on Roll20 now and get a game of 5th edition going, I would grant you that out of the 5 people that you randomly recruited on there, 3 of them would want to play bards. What happened? Why did they become so popular? Is it Chris Pratt's fault? No, not Chris Pratt. He's in
Fine.
everything, but so is Chris Pine. Yeah, is it Chris Pine's fault? Why is the bard so popular? And how did we get on such a digression?
I will certainly say that if you told me that when there was finally a good D&D movie, that the most
Yeah.
that the main character would be a bard, I'd been like, really? It just seems unlikely. Um, I'm looking up right now, what are the most popular classes because I thought they released that data from Roll20. January 19th, 2024. Um, D&D Beyond 2023 Unrolled. Uh, let's get this. Come on,
Now,
do I have
I
to
know
watch
I'm
a
gonna
video? Keep talking.
I'm gonna be proven wrong here. I just say everybody wants to play. But I mean, one of the cool things about the Bard in the modern day Dungeons and Dragons systems is, of course, that uh, it allows you to do a little bit of everything, right? It allows you to dabble. But I think I got off originally point. I was talking about I talked about Darker Dungeons, which made by Glyphy Glyph. It's a fun little mod for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. But my point was I almost always play spellcasters, usually of the Bard variety, and I rolled up 3 straight. It was 2 wizards and 1 sorcerer in the Darker Dungeons mod. And I'd done it specifically well, no, I hadn't done it specifically, but I was happy because I was playing this game and I don't often play like most dungeon masters. We're almost always the forever DM. But the nice thing about we were running it not on Roll20, but on Foundry, and my friend who's really fantastic with setting up all of the rules and mechanics through the system, so it handles everything for you. And of course, that didn't help me learn the spell slots at all because I could just point and click on buttons and it did everything for me.
All right, I'll put
But
this in the. Sorry to interrupt you. I'll put this in the show notes.
yeah,
Um, it's a video from January of this year detailing the most popular races, classes, and so on. And I'm going to read a quote now from this article on The Escapist. This article written by Tara McCauley. Um, quote, of the 6 million new characters created on D&D Beyond in 2023, human and fighter ranked as the top race and class respectively. And so human fighters, which makes sense to me because they're the easiest to make. I'd be interested to know if it would be different if you have a veteran, if you have someone who has 5 characters or more, how many are bard would be an interesting question. I've never played I've never played a bard, and to be honest, I can't remember ever running D&D with a bard in the party.
let's yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, it's fine. It's interesting to me. It's like the bard has become an archetypal Dungeons and Dragons thing within the last few years, and it's a very different bard than that I played when I was always playing bards in 2nd edition D&D. And they're of course they have these little class things that you choose in 5th edition or subclass. What are they called? Archetypes, or I should know what they're called. Where you choose like what direction they're going to go. And I always like to play. Now the bard is this like Carrie Elway's seducer type gadfly. He said he used gadfly at the beginning of this thing. That's a perfect word to use. That's what the bard is these days. And I always kind of played the bard as rather well. I don't know how many folks remember the classic game by Interplay, produced by Brian Fargo, and well, just there was a number of different designers, but the Bard's Tale, classic computer role-playing game by Interplay way back in the day, which was it was the took the elements that came out in wizardry and kind of made, well, yeah, it put glitz and shine on the original wizardry mechanics. But point being, that was the first game that I remember as a youth that really kind of played with the concept of a bard. It was so cool in that computer role-playing game because your bard was constantly playing songs that had different effects on how your party was fighting or even exploring the dungeons. And back then, the bard was was very much a supply. the Bard still is a support character. They have that wonderful mechanic in fifth edition, probably my favorite mechanic in fifth edition, where the Bard plays a song and you get to give somebody a die and say, okay, you can roll this to add something to, whatever you're trying to do, skill checks or combat checks, if I'm not mistaken. That's fantastic. I love that. But the Bard now it's interesting because not in this book is the Bard an archetypal character, because again, well, certainly not in AD&D. It's a darker world, but I would say fifth edition somewhere, and I don't know when, the Bard is like the beholder or any of these other archetypal system ideas in Dungeons and Dragons. And it speaks to the point about Chris Pine, where we're like, it's surprising that a bard would be the main character in the successful Dungeons and Dragons movie. And yet I don't know if it is, because I would actually say the bard to me is now something that's absolutely core, completely entangled with the concept of Dungeons and Dragons, the concept of this bard as this gad-flying character, drinking, lute playing, again, very charismatic type character. Is very much a part of the core DNA of Dungeons and Dragons in 2024.
So let's ask a bold question here. We haven't finished the magic use section in the DMG, but we know its basic outlines, and we know where it goes. You're either praying for spells and you get them in their slots, or you're memorizing spells out of a spell book and you get them in these slots, and when you cast them, they go away. Is that a good system for magic?
I'm glad you asked that, because that really brings us back to the original point, which one of the points that I was trying to make, which is it's fascinating to me that you can say a lot of things about Gary Gygax and his rule systems and the concepts of mechanics, and we have certainly said it on this podcast, and yet these systems, even with the addition of spell slots, they still endure. And when we create fourth edition and you try to push people off that road, they revolt and they say, "Oh, please get back on the Dungeons and Dragons path. You're making everybody nervous." So whether they're good or bad, I don't know. I like them because we grew up with them. They're part of our nostalgia. We should, and I think it's interesting to this point. Where is this coming from? But none other than the great legendary writer Jack Vance, the Dying Earth series, and the concept of these. Like I said, it's one to them. Jack Vance is one of the absolutely fantastic, certainly one of my favorite writers from the Appendix and Encyclopedia. And this concept of these kind of strange, and I'm sorry, I can't think about Jack Vance or the spell casting system and the concept of like taking time to memorize these spells. Then once you cast them, it's completely erased from your mind without thinking. And I guess this is another shout out to Goodman Games, how well they've done that in the Dungeon Crawl Classic system. This concept of magic being a weird, corrupting influence on you, and it's extremely chaotic and strange, and how it does have to dabble in magic is to invite the consequences of forbidden lore and tomes and magic and powers. But yeah, it comes directly, and this is one of those things, just like the troll and Three Hearts and Three Lines, that we can specifically and directly link to actually literary influence. In this case, it's Jack Vance, and that's why we call it the Vancian magic system, which is it's interesting to me because, again, if we talk about 20, we're going back between 2024 and 1977. One of the things I think is funny is that Wizards of the Coast has just released the newest and final, they call it the final module for fifth edition, final adventure module, which I find interesting because, like, well, isn't the new system going to be compatible? So is it really the last? But my point is, it's Vecna, Eve of Ruin. And Vecna, of course, is just an anagram of Jack Vance. So Jack Vance lives on.
I didn't know that. That's fascinating. Wow. Um, so a couple things there. First of all, back in the day on Plot Points, we did a series of episodes called Appendix N University, where we would get together and read Appendix N texts with industry luminaries. I'll put a link in the show notes, but I suppose that would be a good thing for like a crowdfunding goal. Is at some point, if we're making enough money per month, we should totally start that up again, because I feel like this audience and the Appendix N University audience are probably a completely overlapping circle in our Venn diagram. So I'd imagine this audience would like that. Let us know on Discord if you're like, yes, we would love to hear you guys uh, read Jack Vance and talk about it with somebody. Secondly, I wanted to specifically mention, because Scott referenced it earlier, the next couple episodes are going to be Rob Heinso and Jonathan Tweet. Jonathan Tweet, I'm going to call him the lead designer of third, and Rob Heinso, lead designer of fourth. They're going to be on talking about their favorite D&D texts for the next 2 weeks, so you have that to look forward to. But I'm going to say this, Scott. Think this is a bad magic system. I think that, again, if you sat down, raw to design a fantasy magic game in 2024, you would probably not design a system where you forget things. Like you have really smart characters who magically forget things. Because again, it doesn't seem to make much intuitive sense. And there's all sorts of problems with designing a magic system. Like Harry Potter is probably the most famous magic system in the world at this point, and it's a terrible system too. Makes very little sense. But what would you say to someone who came to you and was like, "Look, this just doesn't make any sense, and you this is a holdover from early 1970s design. No one would do it this way today."
Yeah, I would be horrified, shocked, and just completely disappointed in that human being. No, I'm kidding. It's funny. I mean, you said that, and I viscerally, when you were like, "This is a bad magic system," it's like somewhere I heard Ken St. Andrew clapping for you. I think when Tunnels and Trolls was, sorry, Ken St. Andrew was the designer of
I
Tunnels
think
and
is it
Trolls.
Saint
It came
Andre or
with
Saint Andrew?
St. Andre.
Andre. Okay,
But let's check before
it's
I.
okay. Don't worry about it. He's a very patient man.
I am correct. Yep, Ken St. Andre. But he wrote. I mean, what you just kind of said, and it's not. I before you learn it, I would agree with you that it's not particularly intuitive. In fact, it's one of the things that I love about. I love that it's completely literarily. Is that a word? I have a PhD, so I can make up words. Inspired that we can have that direct link. And I think if you haven't read if you haven't read the Dying Earth stories, again, it's going to seem kind of strange, and it isn't intuitive. I know I've said that a number of times, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think you, most people want the system of, what a lot of other systems do is this concept of like spell points or like a number of, yeah, like I've got 20 spell points and I can use them on any of these spells and I know these spells all the time. And that's fa fine and fantastic. But it doesn't quite. I do love the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Fantasy and Magic system. As a matter of fact, if there was one thing that was ever removed that would probably cause me not to play an edition, it would be this. Because I like, and that I my if you've read Vance and you understand how it works in those stories, it's weirdly creepy. I mean, I think it does emphasize this concept of magic being strange and not natural, right? It's not like learning French. You don't pick it up and you know it and you can use it anytime. It's like you are asking some arcane forbidden force to enter your body. And it's so unnatural. It's so strange and dangerous that it can't stay long. Thank goodness, because if it did, it would drive you insane. And once you do actually use it in a physical manner, once you allow it to manifest in the physical, in the prime material plane, as we might say, it's gone because that's how long you can hold it, because that's how powerful these arcane magics that you're using are.
I mean, that's really cool lore around the idea.
Right.
And I will say, man, it's amazing that we're having Rob Hainso on next week to talk about well, now we're going to make him talk about this
Well,
because
yeah.
let me tell you a brief story. Um, so uh in the playtesting and rollout of fourth edition, one of the things that really stuck in people's teeth were the changes around Magic Missile. For Magic Missile, you now needed to roll to hit. Um, and Stephen Radney McFarland, who was one of the designers working on fourth edition, says that he vociferously argued against this, saying that, again, this is one of those things that's going to trip people up. It's just going to seem too different and too weird, and they're not going to like it. And then on top of that, fighters had abilities that allowed them to do automatic damage per turn. And he was like, you took Magic Missile away from the wizards and gave it to the fighter. And you can see how, again, that would just, if you've been playing D&D since first edition, it's just going to rub you the wrong way. It feels like this odd grading change.
But,
Um,
what,
go, go ahead, but if you want
I
to, because
know.
I'm going to go into history. I'm going to keep going on history if you're not going to cut me off.
No, no,
Um,
you should keep going on the history. I just want to make, I'm sorry. I'm chomping at the bit. Is it
go
chomping or
chump,
champing? Somewhere triggers,
chew,
yeah.
chew that bit.
But the concept is, it's so interesting to me what you're talking about. It's like how married we get to these rule systems, and how if you mess with those ideas again, it's similar to my point around how archetypes in D&D become so embedded in our imagination, where I say like Bard wasn't in first edition AD&D, but now really is to me a part of the DNA of Dungeons and Dragons. Some things come and go about some things come and go in the DNA of Dungeons and Dragons, and some things are always there. And Magic Missile being always hitting, or the fighter always having to roll to see if you can hit, that's part of the DNA of D&D. And I think I find it funny that they're messing with that because my gosh, you know that people are going to react to that because that's not we are so invested in these classic concepts. But please go on in the history.
Well, and to go off precisely what you just said, when I said earlier, if you were designing a fantasy game raw in 2024, you would not design the spell system this way. Fourth edition was that attempt to be like,
Right.
let's do something that makes more sense. And people were like, no.
But
And
yeah.
one of the reasons we're having, I shouldn't say one of, I think the reason we're having Hainso and Tweet on in the next couple weeks is they have a Kickstarter for 13th Age running right now, which is their third edition, fourth edition mashup, for lack of a better way of putting it. Like in somewhat, it's perhaps the most gamest of the gamey uh D&D. I don't want to say clones because that seems disrespectful. And they made D20 rolling fantasy games.
But it's
Um,
interesting, like how many designers that worked on Dungeons and Dragons because they're working within the field, they're working within those narrow boundaries of like what you can, what you can't do. Then often, as soon as they're kind of done doing DD, will make because Monty Cook did the same thing with like Arcana Unearthed and some of these other things. Like all the rules that I wanted to put into D&D but I couldn't, I'm now going to release like a side edition
which is
or a
beautiful.
mod, right? Well,
So
that's
beautiful.
fantastic, yeah. And
Um,
it gives us amazing insights into what they were thinking as they were designing the games, right?
I will casually shout out Mike Merles has a Patreon where I believe he is releasing stuff.
Yeah.
And I hear that he is working on some sort of that for 5e. I hope that's not a secret that I just spilled, but um, so if you're really interested in seeing the Mike Merles version of that, I would check out his Patreon. So history. Um, Again, if you go back to the idea of the magic system in D is fundamentally broken, and you pair that with wizards and magic users are the most popular class, you get some interesting things. So Jonathan Tweet, who we'll be having on 2 weeks, when he founded Lion Rampant with Lisa Stevens and Mark Reinhagen, their second product was Ars Magica. And the reason that they went and created Ars Magica, which is kind of a medieval historical fantasy mage game, is because they were like, okay, wizards are the most popular class. Let's take wizards and do them better. And that led to Ars Magica, which down the road led to Mage the Ascension, which is one of my favorite games of all time. And Mage the Ascension handled magic the following way. They said, okay, wizards are people who can do anything they want to in reality. Like they have total godlike power. However, there is a consensus that will crush you if you step outside of the narrow bounds of acceptable reality. So literally, like reality police demons will come and kill you if you summon a dinosaur on Fifth Avenue. Uh, but if you can find some sort of a coincidental way to make that happen within the bounds of consensual reality, then you can totally do it without the reality police showing up. Uh, and it was an incredibly clever magic system. It made you feel so powerful. They are probably the most powerful TTRPG characters ever created because a fairly low, like somebody figured out a fairly low level mage in Mage the Ascension could turn a vampire into a lawn chair. uh it would not be a coincidental effect, but you could just do it and the reality police show up and kick you in the nuts, but your vampire friend is now a lawn chair and you can recline on them. So this problem, the idea that wizards are popular, everyone loves them, but D&D doesn't do a great job with wizards, has been a fruitful vein for other RPG designers to mine these past 40 years, say.
Yeah, I think that's I would agree. I think when you bring in new players to Dungeons and Dragons and kind of especially if you're running an old system like AD&D, I do think the Magic system is always the one that people are like, but this is kind of strange. And then those of us who played it since we were 13 are like, no, it's not. Everything else is strange. But it's interesting that so many, and I'm not, I've never played any of those title, um, you know,
Those
um,
White Wolf games,
yeah, just White
Vampire,
Wolf.
The Masquerade,
But
Mage, The Ascension.
and I don't want to go off on a digression, but
Digress.
my entire dissertation is based on the concept that when people sit down at a tabletop role-playing game, they're basically, indulging in a practice of consensual collaboration of a reality, and that is basically. Whenever I try to explain this to people, whenever I try to do my dissertation elevator pitch, I'm always like, and that's a model for what we're doing in real life. And I'm just like, it's not a model. That's not actually my dissertation is saying, no, it's exactly what we're doing, where we create the actual physical realities around us. Um, as quantum mechanics shown, we're basically based on observation. Reality doesn't come into being until you actually observe it. And you're explaining to me the magic, the ascension magic system. I'm like, wow, how did I not read that for my dissertation? Because that's completely based on many of this whole concept that there's a reality that's being held together by the glue of consensual observations and agreements, and then it can be broken by this that reality can be broken by this certain set of class of person. It's really fascinating to me.
And we
I don't know
gotta
if
we
I
gotta read your dissertation this summer. We have to. We just we have to like take it. Read it, send it out to the Discord users, and say, okay, here's an extra special. Let me write that down on the list of things. So Appendix N University and Reed Scott's
well, it's so far
this.
afield from, you know, I don't know. You start dabbling in these concepts. You start looking at somebody talked about the fact that somebody had a very nice post on our Discord community saying that, reading D&D aloud is actually not really about Dungeons and Dragons, just a lens that we talk about politics, religion, and philosophy. And it was a very, very nice comment, very much appreciated. And it's interesting to me that when you start that tabletop role-playing games in so many ways, it invites these types of conversations because it's I reading we were recently reading Dr. Laycock's book and just thinking about the impact that it had on society, that people were just so terrified of this kind of new strange practice, and of course that it was children that were mostly indulging in this practice. But Dungeons and Dragons just has some fascinating reverberations throughout, our ludic, certainly our ludic structures, the way that we play games, that we think about games. Levels and hit points are now ubiquitous throughout almost all of our games, and even some of the applications that we use just to manage our finances. But I don't know where I was going with that. It's
Well,
just
I can bring everything back around for a second here.
yeah, it's
So
just amazing how D&D is everywhere and what an impact it's had on the way we think and look at things.
I mean, I know we talked about this before, and I won't go into the whole thing again, but uh, the mere fact that the alignment system is now just an independent meme that people have
Yeah.
found, law versus chaos and good versus evil to be such a convenient moral framework that, again, I think if you're on the internet and under the age of 40, you understand that the alignment system because you've just seen it in so many memes. And it's so easy to explain. It's an idea that is broken off from D&D and has currency of its own. But I was going to say, why don't we bring this full circle by reading the Illusionist class from the first edition AD&D Player's Handbook? That seems like a good way to kind of wrap things up since we were talking about how they got their spells. That work for you,
Perfect.
Julio? All right. The Illusionist. This is from page 26 of the Player's Handbook. Illusionists form a subclass of magic users, and in most respects, they conform to the characteristics of the latter. To be an illusionist, a character must have a minimum intelligence of 15 and a minimum. I'm going to keep that in because that sounded really funny to me. I'll start that sentence over again, though, since apparently I can't say the word minimum anymore. To be an illusionist, a character must have a minimum intelligence of 15 and a minimum dexterity of 16. A high manual dexterity is required in casting of the spells used by this class. An important difference between illusionists and magic users is that the former do not gain any experience bonus for having high scores in their required abilities of intelligence and dexterity, While being equal or even slightly inferior to normal magic users in most respects, illusionists have different and highly effective spells to employ. A perusal of the number and types of spells usable by illusionists, see character spells, will reveal that they are at least as powerful as normal magic users and possibly slightly more potent at very high levels. The power of illusionists due to their spells is offset, however, by the limitations placed upon the magic items they can use. The magical items usable by illusionist class characters are enumerated below. All potions not restricted to fighters only, illusionist scrolls and magic user scrolls which contain spells usable by illusionists, all rings, rod of cancellation, staff of striking, and wands of enemy detection, fear, illusion, magic detection, metal and mineral detection, secret door and trap detection, wonder. Miscellaneous magic items usable by every class of characters, crystal balls, but not with any added powers, all robes, excluding Robe of the Archmagi, and books and similar written works readable by magic users. Artifacts which are not prescribed items with respect to illusionists, such as armor, swords, axes, etc., magic daggers. Illusionists are capable of manufacturing those magical items which create or sustain illusion. They may also do so at 10th level illusionist and above. This is done in much the same manner in which regular magic users create magic items, and then we get the experience table for illusionists, and then we're on to thief. Um,
Right.
and that illusionist is not a class in 5th edition, right?
No, no, we lost the illusion. It's funny talking about like things that we lose in the DNA of Dungeons and Dragons. And early, the illusionist was really this kind of, it was less. I mean, I think there's again, I can't remember what are they called, the subclass, subcore classes. When you choose a fifth edition wizard, you have to say, okay, I'm going to go in this direction. I'm going to go in this other direction. I think you can choose it based on the school of magic, which 2E would introduce us to. By the way, what a brilliant system in 2E, the concept of having these different schools of magic. I've always loved, transmuters, evokers, and illusionist was one of those as well. But yeah, it's not a separate class like it was in first edition D&D. And
Yeah, yeah. Again, having 2nd edition as my 1st edition,
mhm,
I certainly remember the specialists in the different schools of magic, which I thought was very cool.
love it.
Reading the Illusionist again, it seems a little thin to me. Like, I would love to see the spells. Like, is that spell list really so incredibly lewd that you're going to be like, okay, I'm just gonna forget all these other spells and go with the Illusionist? Like,
Oh
maybe it
man.
is.
Yeah, it is. It's awesome. Seriously, Illusionist is one of my favorite classes of first edition D&D, but it requires it requires a creative player to play Illusionist right. And I have there's so many, like, we can't read this Illusionist section without me wanting to go so many things because I get really excited about it. It's one of the best character classes you can play in first edition D&D because, and I'm sorry, it's so interesting that you bring up the Mage Ascension wizard, which of course I wasn't familiar with at all, but I'm having a hard time not thinking that there were
We're
some.
gonna have to read that aloud sometime soon
Yeah,
because
right.
again, it's one of my favorite games.
Yeah, well, it sounds like there must have been some influence from the first edition illusionist, or at least some of the ideas. Of course, these ideas are all out there,
Yeah.
but you have to have a creative player to an illusionist because it's the one. It's not like Magic Missile, like I do 1d4 plus 1 damage. That's not what Magic Missile does in position. But anyway, the point being, it doesn't have straight mechanics. It's always like, well, you create a phantasmal force or you create some illusion that doesn't have spell, but as this, the player is the one always has to come up with exactly what that illusion looks like. And it's really fun narrative because you're going to think about the monster that you're trying to trick. You're going to think about the creatures that you're trying to fool as you're getting by. Famously, if we bring it back to our friend Chris Pine, remember he casts an illusion to get, so they can run past the
So
guards.
perfect. So
And
perfect.
yeah, the spell fails a little bit and has that weird kind of like CGI uncanniness. But it's so fascinating because again, I can't get off this concept that here we have Gary Gygax displaying, and of course we know about his, we know that he was very religious. We know that he had, a lot of, his personal philosophies. But here he is displaying himself very much as what I would call a materialist, as somebody that believes that there is a hard and fast reality that can be only manipulated so much. That there is an objective reality which is something that I completely disagree with. I think that reality is entirely subjective because the illusionist is what they're called, an illusionist, implying, of course, that anything that they create is not real. It is something that is designed to trick, fool, or in Bard's case, seduce. And which I find really, really fascinating, where your Mage Ascension wizard is actually changing the collaboration and creation of a reality, which is much more of a subjective concept, which is the idea that reality is more fluid. It's more just a collection of possibilities, which is how I think of the actual reality of our world. But here we have Gary Gygax saying, no, there is a real objective reality. Illusions play with it. They will trick you, but that's not the right reality. But there is one pure reality.
All right. Well, if you don't mind, I would like to take a second and shout out that the Mothership box set has finally dropped. It's behind me. I'm wearing my Mothership shirt today. And if you have not experienced Mothership, it's incredible. Scott mentioned that he was actually unaware of Mothership. So, Chase Carter on Rascal News, and if you're not subscribing to Rascal News, I highly recommend you subscribe to Rascal News. Uh, Chase Carter on Rascal News wrote a long encomium. That's the word for a long praise speech, right? Um, on the Mothership box set. It's titled Mothership's Deluxe Set Feels Like Buying a Video Game Console. The subtitle is Box Sets, and then it's the greater than sign, literally anything else. And I'm going to read you a few paragraphs from this because not only is it beautiful writing, but this is perfect because, again, Scott said he was unaware of Mothership. And my God, Scott, if there was ever a sci-fi game that had Scott written all over it, it is Mothership. So, back when I still purchased new video game consoles, I loved the process of bringing them home, carefully unwrapping the controllers, cords, and other peripherals, plugging everything in, connecting to the internet, and watching as the inevitable first day system update installed. As an adult, I'd scroll Twitter and enjoy the stream of other people enjoying their new $400 toys. But as a young child, I'd eagerly tear through the instruction manual of whatever launch title was tucked safely inside all that cardboard and plastic. That potent mixture of palpable anticipation and limitless potential is seared into my synapses like a brand. I never thought I'd feel that burn again. Then my Mothership First Edition Deluxe set arrived. 2 years in the making and shipping, Mothership's ultimate physical expression is a beautiful thing to behold on your kitchen table. The box is a buttery black shocked through with gold design that reminds me of overpriced luxury condoms, or more complimentary, expensive chocolate truffles. Rectangular and solid in its design, it even evokes the look of a video game console tailor-made to churn mechanical bleeps and bloops into fun. The innards are a neatly arranged selection of all the materials you need to run Tuesday Night Games Mothership, an OSR style tabletop RPG about being extremely effing stressed in space with real life friends, dice, punch out character tokens with plastic standees, a folded map that measures distances and travel through space on one time. What's the delay of a transponder signal? Weapons fire? Communications during dogfights? And a bisected layout of a space station on another. There's a trifold facilitator screen decorated with labyrinthine metal ductwork. And underneath it all are stapled zine style rulebooks and adventures that backers funded during the original crowdfunding campaign back in 2022. And if you were to ask me what is it, and this is me talking now, what is it that makes Mothership just so outstanding? You get this incredibly elegant, simple OSR design. Character creation takes no time. The character sheet is also your instructions for creating a character, and the adventures are so good. The designer is also clearly a layout person, and the combination of brilliant design with amazing layout is just a knockout punch. Their first adventure was called Dead Planet, and I'm going to say it was again like 40 pages long, like zine sized, and it had not only, as I recall, two dead planets for your spacers to explore with terrible things in all of them. It had maps for every location and a two-page random derelict ship generator. Uh, and using D6 dice. Like it was absolutely elegant and brilliant. It is producing sub creations. Like people are coming in and using these rules to make other games. One that I found just in the past 2 weeks that I am fascinated by and trying to explain to myself why I shouldn't purchase it because I don't need another game is called Cloud Empress, which is a post-apocalyptic eco-fantasy role-playing game of a world where giant cicadas come out every year and eat everything, but the dead cicadas basically have magic LSD in their carcasses. So everyone is wandering around getting the LSD out of the cicada carcasses, getting high, getting magic powers while they're getting high, and avoiding the giant cicadas that want to eat them and searching for the missing Cloud Empress, who apparently ran away from her position in her Cloud City. So Mothership is again one of those really fruitful branches of the OSR that just keeps shooting off bloody buds.
It's interesting that you mentioned, it looks like the person is a designer. So Sean McCoy is the person who's created
Yeah.
Mothership, and it's interesting because, I think the same way about Kelsey Dion and Shadow Dark, which is that the design of that game, which is wonderfully stark and of course black and white in the same way that the Mothership is like it's interesting that we're getting these folks that are really gifted at design making these things and how important that is to the overall aesthetic, how it suggests very much the aesthetics and themes of what's going on. So I looked at the Kickstarter for um Mothership. It
Mothership.
looks really, really, really Mothership. Looks really, really cool.
Again, you and I need to send our kids and our wives to Europe for a month or something, and we just need to like play games for a solid month and catch up with everything. Um, But yeah, if you haven't picked up Mothership, again, they've I want to point out they haven't given us any money. I paid for all of this stuff. It's not like I got anything for free. This is a genuine, legitimate shout out that your money is well spent investing in Mothership. A good rule set is a good rule set, but man, you need that killer adventure that makes you want to run the game. Um, like Swords of the Serpentine came out, gosh, 18 months ago, I think now. And it's an investigative fantasy game. It's set in an incredible fantasy city, of which there are many, but here's another one. Uh, but they haven't put out an adventure book for it yet. And I know adventures exist. I'm like, come on, guys, put out an adventure book. I'd buy that in a second. And hopefully, there's one that makes me go, I have to run this. Um, all right. With that, I suppose I should say,
Well,
oh, go ahead, Scott.
I would just say that there's a great segue here, which is if you would like Mr. Riggs and myself to be able to play some of these tabletop role-playing games and be able to afford all of the wonderful box sets that we all wish we could collect and completely stuff up our, you guys can't see, but my office is a very, very tiny little room, and I barely have any room because of all the books, but there's still room for more. You can always support us on our Patreon so that we can afford these wonderful tabletop role-playing games that we always want to play. Yeah, because I mean, you've just shown me Mothership now. I'm like, oh, I need this too now. Because it's absolutely brilliant. But there's a Patreon that you can support us through. Yeah, for $3 a month, which is the what is it's not even D&D Beyond is more expensive than that, and of course, more importantly, you support us and what we're doing here. So please go to the Patreon and support us so we can play Mothership.
And there's a Discord which I actually post on, and you can talk to Scott and I on the Discord and engage with other reading D&D aloud listeners. I don't check it as much as I should, but I'm checking it at least weekly. I'm gonna say I'm at least getting on there once a week and shouting out at people. So it's an
Yeah,
effective way to reach me.
somebody
Um,
asked for a channel that's an Ask Us Anything channel, and you did a good job answering folks' questions on there. And but yeah, again, you get access to the Discord by joining up on the Patreon, and you are welcome to ask us anything.
I guess I should also say I'm going to be at Gen Con in August in Indianapolis this year. I am part of the Writers Symposium, so I am doing an absolute ton of events, not just my usual D&D, I shouldn't say usual D&D history stuff because my usual D&D history stuff now seems to be I do new seminars on new topics every year at Gen Con. But if you are going to Gen Con and you have not yet put Ben Riggs into the search bar, if you put Ben Riggs into your Gen Con event search bar, you're like 11 things are going to pop up. So check it out, see if you're interested in any of them. Uh, I suppose the most interesting one to our listeners would be the Battle for the Soul of D&D, which I'm assuming is going to be my last 10 years of D&D, what I've learned from everyone through their exit interviews process. And I would assume that is a proto book. And that my next book will be that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe somebody stops talking to me, or maybe everybody has boring things to say. But certainly so far, when I've interviewed people who were fired from Wizards in December, it's always been interesting, fruitful, and I've learned stuff that kind of blows my mind. So,
We
man,
should also, I think our plan was also to do a reading D&D aloud at Gamehole Con, which
yep,
is coming up as well. And I will be at Gamehole Con in addition to hopefully being able to do this podcast live with Ben, running AD&D. I signed up to do their as part of the 50th anniversary. They asked DMs who are familiar with AD&D, First Edition Dungeons and Dragons, to run basically an hour game introducing folks to the system. So I will be doing that throughout the day as well.
that's really cool. So with that, everybody, have a great day. Talk to you later. See you next week.